welcome you. It's so good. It was great talking to you on the telephone. I'm really looking forward to talking about the human condition and so forth. And in the audience, the guest is Neal M. Goldsmith, as you can see, Ph.D., and he's a psychologist. He's also a psychedelic healer. And he's got a very, very interesting story. He's got a very wide arc of intellectual curiosity and knowledge, and he's going to be very interesting to talk with him. And Neal, welcome so very much to Conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really fun to be here.
I had a great talking with you on we have a lot of mutual friends and associates and so forth. But could you, as I do, share your own background, born and raised,
Sure.
and educate a little bit, and then we'll get into a discussion of the human condition and psychiatric or psychological processes.
That'd be great.
And particularly psychedelics, which are beginning to emerge in terms of understanding human psychology. But your own background, please.
Psychedelics beginning to re-emerge. Well,
Double,
first the tribal, and then the re-emergence of the 60s, and now the re-emergence that's happening now in perhaps a more thoughtful way.
Yeah.
I'll tell you more about that as we go on. I should state at the very beginning, I'm not really a psychedelic healer in the sense that I don't really use psychedelics in my practice.
Right.
You know, for obvious reasons, it's illegal. I'm a psychologist, and I see clients. I don't call them patients because I don't really believe in the, in the pathology model and the medical model.
The medical model you do not believe.
Well, for medical disorders, but for what's called neurosis, which is a terrible phrase, really, a terrible word, that, it rhymes with psychosis. It's a diagnosis. It's one of those osis words. It medicalizes.
But it has become part of the lexicon of the medical model.
And I think we should.
In terms of drug policy, certainly is there.
I'd like to strike it from the lexicon, actually, because it's really a misnomer.
And from the law book.
Well, it medicalizes a process that's natural. The natural unfolding of your own maturation. You hit a wall, you get over it. You hit another wall, you get over it. You see that development is stepwise. But somehow when you hit that wall and you're beating your head against the wall and you're unhappy and miserable and acting out symptomatically, the doctors have at you. And then they start giving you medication and pharmaceuticals, and you're in the medical system.
Yeah,
but
we
it's
have
normal.
that, and we have other people who talk. The talk therapy, in-depth talk, psychoanalysis, in 16 years, and that kind of thing. That's a different way of dealing with it. And there's different systems of approaching it.
And if you take the talk therapy, if you think of myself as a psychologist, if I think of myself as a doctor who's going to heal people and fix them up because they're sick, that's the wrong model. Because for me, neurosis, if you're psychotic, if you're obsessive compulsive, if you wash your hands 50 times a day, if you're schizophrenic, you have a medical disorder and you need to go to a physician, a psychiatrist, who can heal you with drugs or surgery or whatever it may be. But if you are like everybody, really, who's quote-unquote neurotic, if everybody's got the disease, it's not a disease. It's like E. coli bacteria in your gut or the appendix. Everybody's got it. It's not an illness. It's part of the human condition. So I think the real issue that people are grappling with is developmental and a normal process of developmental maturation rather than a pathology. Because again, medicalizing everybody's neurotic to one extent or another. And so to medicalize that is a big mistake. I didn't tell you about my background.
No, you will. Okay. Please now.
Okay, I will. I'm a psychologist. I was raised in the suburbs of New York. I went through a pretty traditional upbringing, and we talked about psychedelics. When I was in college, I took psychedelics, but it was really more like what I think of now as intellectual fun and games.
Right. Now let's get it at the time. You're in college when you were about 1970 or so?
Yeah, I graduated high school in '69.
Right. Okay.
And graduated
in the middle
college.
Of that period. That was a very fruitful period,
Very much so. Although once I went through that period and then had my fallow period I'll tell you about, and then came back into an interest in psychedelics, at the age of about 40 or so, I did a lot of reading at that point, whereas I didn't read anything when I was in college, about psychedelics, I mean. Even though I was a psychology major and I took psychedelics, I never learned about it in college in psychology classes.
No doors of perception or anything?
No, not even. I mean, I had some, I read Doors of Perception in high school.
Yeah, everybody did.
But I was never assigned any reading. The word psychedelic never came up in my training.
What does it have, a literal translation? Or
psychedelic, it's delos. It's a Greek combination of psyche, the soul, and delos, to emerge, to manifest.
Okay,
so
that's interesting in itself. I never realized,
People actually translate psychedelic as mind manifesting usually. But the word psyche, the root of the word psychology, means soul in Greek.
Okay.
It's not really mind, it's soul.
Okay.
And soul is a term that people don't like because it's mushy and religious and amorphous and all. But whatever it is,
yeah, I don't like it.
You know, it's not a great word, but it means something. It refers to something that's real. And just because we haven't been able to measure it or categorize it or systematize it fully or understand it fully, doesn't mean it's not real.
What
There's
else
something
is it referred
us.
to as in terms that are not quasi-spiritual?
Well, they call it mind manifesting.
Mind manifesting is different. Mind is also a little
but
bit
even
meta. Mind is even meta to brain and so forth in terms of...
They don't say brain manifesting.
No, they don't. No.
Or neurotransmitter manifesting.
No, I know. That's right. So one is if you're in the Western model, or if you're in if you're not in the spiritual realm of meta considerations like Vedic or any of that stuff, you're in materialism, then you want to avoid those kind of terms that are quasi-religious.
Right. So you've described very nicely the duality then.
Right. East and East
spirit,
and West and West.
Between East and West, between South and North.
Male and
the
female.
Southern shamanistic approach, between a spirit and material world. But really, to me, what's happening, I think, in our society today, and you've interviewed so many people with so many, brilliant ideas, that you'll probably have noticed this, that we're reinventing, reintegrating the world. If you think of the tribal world as being integral or integrated, but really not very successful in the sense of they would die at the age of 30 of an infection, let's say. And because of that, our eye, finger, frontal lobe complex that's so effective at changing things created this, this world with products and science and industry and medicine. So now we've come sort of halfway around the circle. We're not in nature anymore, so we're sort of alienated. But we live to be 87, all right. So now I think it's like a spiral. I think we're halfway around. If we continue around that spiral, full circle, we're really up one level. So we have a reintegrated world where we live to 87, but or maybe 60, but we're reintegrated into nature, into the planet. We don't have global warming. We don't have the rape of the planet. So I think there's a reintegration process happening that...
You mean if we get it right? Are you talking about looking into the future?
I think it's the healing of Cartesian duality, ultimately, that's been bedeviling us for hundreds of years.
I see, yeah. You had that thing. I mean, I guess we all can believe in that we're with Homo sapien, evolution, that there's been an evolutionary process, 3.8 billion. Did you see Ventnor just synthesized a new life form in the genome? Amazing. If this is correct, amazing. But it's 3.8 billion years. You had to get over the barrier from something material to organic, beginning of processed DNA, simple DNA or something. And then once we got that, we got evolution. And you can see everything in evolution. 8/10 of the time was bacteria only that was evolving. And it was done within a, what do you call it, thermodynamic relationship to the sun and outer space that kept it in a certain temperature thing that was very unique. And as far as we know, we reach out, Mr. Sagan and Sete and so forth, reach out for the idea, and probability tells us there probably are other systems within the universe that have this evolutionary process, but we don't know yet, and we've not had any contact with, that we have an evolutionary process that came up. Most of the species are gone, have died out, and then we come up the hominoid line, Australopithecine, 4 million years ago. We get to Homo habilis, and then we get to a thing in about 200,000 years ago, Homo sapien appeared. Is that correct? Does that seem true to you?
That seems
so that we've been here about 10,000 generations, and now the question is, where are we now? And what is happening with the fact that we have a unique capability of extending consciousness into the environment, where you can make the environment other than in the Eden sense is given, which is the lot of most of the creatures, and make our own world, as Gordon Childs would have written and so forth. Or
Buckminster Fuller.
Or Buckminster Fuller, or most anybody who thinks that you have the ability to change the environment rather than just, in a certain sense, accept it. I don't know what the primitive state, Ashley Montague wrote very well on the possibility that it could be understood in just strictly species beneficial terms of the pair bonding and other kinds of things that would have given an advantage in that. But through a lot of that period, I think we were in Africa, we're all out of Africa, that we were probably prey most of the time, to creatures that were faster, stronger, more endowed with claws and so forth. And there's a lot of evidence, fossilized and otherwise, that we were probably prey for a long time. And in general, my thought of it is agreement with the poet James Joyce, who said history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. And that I don't think the pristine world of Rousseau or somebody was so beautiful and pristine and wonderful, and we've messed it up. But those are some of the contentions in which the human condition is addressed now. Does any of that not ring true to you, or is that a correct reading of things?
I think it's a correct reading, but maybe a different spin than I would take.
Okay, spin's important.
Right,
Particularly
well, interpretation.
These days with PR. All right,
what I mean by that
nuance,
is, well, you know, something you said a couple of minutes ago that really struck me was you were describing how in the early formation of the planet, how the temperature was kept within certain limits by the sun.
Between 12 and 32 degrees for billions of years.
Right, and so that reminds me of the Gaia hypothesis.
Gaia, yeah.
You know, that there's, but you know, if you think about Gaia, you can sort of make it symbolic or superstitious. You can create like the Gaian entity, and you know that's the god of Gaia or this sort of supernatural entity that's controlling everything.
Well, we've done that.
But to me, that would be a misinterpretation
of Gaia.
Of Gaia, even.
Okay.
Because Gaia to me is holism, is fit, is harmony, and that's something that doesn't require.
Wait a minute, you're making a lot of assumption what you're saying there. Gaia is harmony or some sort of thing.
The way I.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No,
you want to get a wholeness to the thing. I don't. I want to see it within evolutionary, materialistic terms, evolution, Buckminster Fuller, and that it's synergistic, and we don't know systems that we think we know, because we've been living in ignorance and still do in terms of broader systems, and we're probably coming to a new relationship in universe than that which we've been for 200,000 years at this particular time.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
No mention of any gods, no walrus, no Saint Walrus, no nothing of the gods that we've come up with and invented in order to give some sort of a appreciation of our self-reflective consciousness and being able to ask the deeper questions of what it's all about, which are all, in my mind, myths. And made up, and not relevant except in a metaphoric way.
We said waking up from a nightmare that we've been having for 200,000 years. I think that's probably an accurate way of putting it. And in that 200,000 years, we've been trying to change the world through our intellect, through our consciousness, through interfacing with the environment.
And its extension through technology.
Machinery and technology,
yeah, it's unique.
But it is unique. Well, not so much.
Well, beavers make dams, don't they? And there's a lot of things with ants. They got great engineering and everything.
Right.
But in terms of a conscious process and understanding,
well,
humanity stands out at the apex of that. And does that apex understanding of consciousness represent any notion of the way universal systems are set up?
I like the idea of universal systems.
I do too,
I think universal systems have a certain integral aspect to them where they're harmonious. Not in the sense of there not being conflict or things going out of whack, but in general there's sort of a fit, sort of a way things fit together. And that this idea of using our frontal lobes, our brilliant minds,
which Australopithecine didn't have,
to change the environment.
Right. Or extend the technology that will change it.
Yes, or to use the technology to change it, or a stick or a weapon or an atom bomb for that matter.
Iterations there.
There's a lot of short-term focus in terms of the way humans use tools and use their mind.
Right.
They want to survive today. They don't really think so much about whether they're going to be around in 100 years. Thus we have global warming and those sorts of things. They want to focus on getting a meal today, not so much about their community. Or maybe their community, but not beyond their community, because beyond the community is the other.
Well,
and the other is the competitor.
You think that's been operative through a lot of human human evolution?
I do, and I think so. Our use of our brain has been interesting and very effective on the world, but hasn't been in harmony with the way things have been, because we stepped away from, look, who wants to shiver in the rain, out in nature? You don't want to do that. You want to develop a frontal lobe. You want to develop a way to change the world, to make a shelter over you, so you don't have to shiver in the rain. Exactly.
Or you could come upon a cave.
It's adaptive.
You could come upon a cave like a bear does, or a person could,
and then later recreating it as a house. But it's adaptive to do so because you'll live longer. But it's very short term. And so what I'm thinking is, over the longer haul of our evolution, that eventually we come to an awakening, kind of like the Buddhist philosophy, to becoming aware not only of ourself, but our entire self, not just our mind, but our whole organism, including something deeper that we all share. Thinking about mankind in general, thinking about life on Earth in general, thinking beyond that about the material world in general.
Do you think?
Taking a broader perspective.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is where we go. We go from being integrated into nature, but not being conscious about it, to using our conscious minds to control nature, but not being integrated and therefore healthy and whole and happy, to coming to a place where we have both.
I wonder if you could think in terms of things in a comprehensive way. It was Kipling, right, and others who said East is East and West is West.
And near the twain
shall meet, or something like that.
But the twain is meeting now.
Well, I think it is in a global village, that kind of thing. But
and that supports the integral hypothesis.
Integral hypothesis, I'm not sure what that means. But the point being is that, it seems to me that the Western model, or our model, is we understand the materialism and consciousness emerge out of a materialistically understood evolutionary process in terms of getting at higher levels if humanity is apexing that process. Just stop for a minute. And on the other side, on the Vedic level, it's the Vedics to the East. And they say that consciousness is pre-existing and the material can be done by dealing with consciousness. Do you think that's adequate in terms of the differentiation between East and West that still informs the spiritual traditions and ethical systems and so forth?
Well, I think they're both possibly, they can coexist, because the conscious mind certainly evolved out of a material evolutionary process of humans. Absolutely right.
Yeah,
but there's
did all.
Yes, well, but there's a broader sense of consciousness, of, consciousness like we conceive of it as an entity or an individual or a personality is not what I mean. But some kind of, sort of holistic gestalt existence of the world at large, or the universe at large.
Okay, those are two big jumps,
That existence is prior to the evolution of mankind.
Well,
so our individual consciousness evolved through, in a material way, it's true. But there's sort of a mind, if you think of Gaia writ large, to the universe as a whole, there's this sort of, not global mind of Gaia, but a universal mind.
Well, that might be. I think Rupert Sheldrake, you get to Rupert Sheldrake or something like that, then they might be able to see it. But Gaia can see the Earth, a biological process, as an organism.
But think of the whole universe.
That's big enough.
Take that concept and apply it to the universe as a whole.
Sheldrake would try and take it there, or some of our mystics would try and take it
Exactly. And they call it mystics now because we don't have a proper language to accommodate or incorporate the mystic worldview into the Western lexicon. But as we do that, as we do that twain meeting, as we do through the global village, and I think East and West become integrated. Instead of that split, we have now a reintegration. And there's a big difference between a reintegrated duality versus a tribal or primitive view where it was never split in the first place.
Well, it was, where
it was whole because they were integrated into nature, but they hadn't gone through Cartesian duality and then re-emerged into an integral
Well, that could all be
whole.
seen in the historical context of, the Enlightenment and that kind of thing that came out. But the people were sitting around in front of caves with mastodons and coming up with ideas about what it's all about and stories and myths about
eating magic mushrooms.
I guess they did. I don't know how far back the psychedelic or mind-altering substances that exist in nature were there. But I'm wondering at the larger level of things, Fuller, who I guess we both admire, it seems to me the whole intellectual community admires when they get to understand what he represents and what he was doing and everything. He was very important in terms of that period, 1970 or so, when there was some sort of a rend perhaps in the normal evolutionary pattern that could be addressed. But he used to cast about, and he proposed synergy. And it's really interesting. He was there. He would be giving talks in the 50s, early 60s, and he would ask an audience of 1,000, has anybody heard of the word synergy? And he based his whole thing on synergy. And he said that it's a synergy of the behavioral systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. There's something more than the sum of the parts. And it now is on the every ad agency's lips and everything like that. And then he cast about and he said, is there any purpose to biological evolution or a biological process on this planet, thinking about it, which would include humanity in all of our variegated forms? And he said he came to the conclusion that it was the biological, the universe is subject to the second law of thermodynamics. It's all thermodynamics. And that is that all systems, closed systems, will move toward chaos or entropy to the limits of the system. And he said the biological process was an anti-entropic, he came to call it syntropic, synergistic, anti-entropic function that moved across consciousness and brought increased patterns of conscious understanding of the process of which we are a part. There's no way that the Australopithecine 4 million years ago could have taken the measure of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. There's moving that way. And do you think we're at a moment of qualitative transformation in the evolution of consciousness on that scale to where we're closing quotes on the human experience, and we're coming to a point where we're being tested like the birth or punctuated equilibrium in evolutionary process, where you have steady state,
and
then you have quickening, and then there is very quickly, all things considered, the new appears, like a new species or a new relationship to the system that has been you've been moving toward. Do you think we're perhaps at that point, which would mean we're closing quotes on the human experience, and we're going to come, if we make it, as he said, without now, on the averse side of that living, that would be like the prophetic view of liberation and universal justice, which has never been. It's always been unjust, with the strong riding over the weak and so on. Universal justice of humanity and the fulfillment of the given direction of each individual human being, part of the human experience within an ecological context, will come into resonancy, and that it will associate with the universe, and that we may be living at that time, at this particular time.
Yes.
That's a big thing. It's hard to do, it's hard to get, because it's measured against the fact we also have that technological capability has now reached a point where if the weapons which have been released against one another in the historical pattern, at least since empires, since the Neolithic, they've been using it to steal grain from the other people and make their tribe strong, still hold.
Right.
The realpolitik still holds, the same ancient things, except the weapon systems are now species lethal, apparently. We don't know, but from modeling, it is that we now can wipe out the Homo sapiens
like
species.
Ice 9 of
Couldn't do it in the Second
9.
World War. Couldn't do it in the Second World War. That recently. So that we're coming to a time of qualitative transformation, and that there would be, and to know what it is outside the womb, you can't know that outside the womb, even though there's all these spiritual, so-called integrative, holistic systems are trying to project what that outer is. We can't know that until we get there and successfully navigate through to where we have this liberated order, which is totally inconsistent with all of human history. That we're coming to a birth. Collectively as a whole system. Can any of that make sense to you?
I'd like to think that that's true, that we're coming to a fundamental transition.
Big,
that's different,
not a paradigm, 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 a paradigm shifts. Not one little paradigm like ladies or blacks or something like that, or gays or something that people focus on, because there's so much injustice.
Well, you talked about synergy being the definition having to do with the outcome of which could not be predicted by the parts.
The
like
behavioral system's unpredicted by the sum of the parts. That is, you can't know. If you're in the birth canal or the womb, you can't know what it is outside of that until you get there. You can make projections and myths and everything on the spiritual side, but in a materialistic way, we can understand that in a way that's just simply not been available to us by our technological extension of consciousness.
Well, I think that this ability to view life, to view our individual lives, life on the planet, to have scientific knowledge, the tool, the microscope or the telescope, to be able to see, metaphorically, to have those tools to be able to really see inside and see the big picture as well, and to really grasp it in a way that's not fear-based, that's not based on stealing the grain from the next city-state over, but something where you have a more sort of holistic or integral view of life on the planet, of the entire, the global village, the internet.
Or Gaia.
Creates, or Gaia as well, creates a sense of oneness, really, of that we're all related in some ways, even though we're individuals as well, and we have different nested hierarchies of village or country or region, but that, you know, global, we take a global perspective and we see us as all being one. So that, that
right.
perspective, I think, is what's fundamentally different. I think that ever since, you know, the year one, ever since 200,000 years ago, ever since we first started to evolve the frontal lobes in order to fight against, to address, you know, the threats of nature, quote unquote threats of nature, the difficulty of being prey, that we evolved this ability to protect ourselves, to think and see ever more clearly about what the threat is and how we can address it, and to develop not our claws but our minds to be able to compete more effectively. That tool has paradoxically turned into a tool that enables us to see also the big picture, to see us as individuals all the way down to the bottom of us, to have this holistic view of ourselves and of the planet, which to me is what I refer to as the integral view. You can call it synergistic for that matter, but it's fundamentally different from what's gone, you know, through our entire history of hominid development, which has been competitive and trying to use our frontal lobes, our brains, to be able to compete more effectively. I think now the perspective it gives us enables us to look at the planet differently, and the internet is a very concrete example of that perspective. You know, it's funny because you don't, you know, there's the other, the concept of the other, that which is not in your little community or your family. But if you have, you know, an email relationship with somebody in Lithuania or whatever, then you're not going to want to bomb them.
It's amazing.
So, you know, it becomes something where your perspective broadens, and I think that's what the Eastern philosophy brings us, but in a sort of like a symbolic kind of a non-scientific way, although yoga is very scientific in its own way, but you know, it's not spelled out in that kind of Western intellectual tradition. So it's sort of it's rejected or relegated to the realm of mystics and gurus and religious folks.
Well, we've had those,
but I think now we're reintegrating that Eastern perspective into our West, and West is being modified and East is being modified, and we're going to have some new transitional third thing that's not just a paradigm shift, like you say, but it's a transition for humanity as a whole.
No, what I say is a paradigm, a paradigm, a paradigm, a paradigm, a paradigm, and all the institutions we've inherited out of history are essentially out of date with what the future requires in terms of this new emerging paradigm, a paradigm, a paradigm, a paradigm, education, military, everything down the line, economic finance, everything down the line, everything is now, it's a shift is required, and we don't have vision for that because we're all reifying the outdated institutions, which I guess we have to do and anchor ourselves to history or to the evolutionary process, but we don't have a vision of a liberated order. We can't have that.
If you take the biggest picture perspective, because looking back 100 years or 1,000 years isn't going to really help us, but if you look at the whole, you know, expression of evolution over time, like you've been bringing us to
3.8 billion years when it first got started.
Then you can begin to get some kind of sense as to what's in store for us. And you know, I also like to be integrative, not integral, that word, but integrating different perspectives. So you know, it's sort of like a sieve in a way, and you know, what makes it through my conceptual sieve, and of all the different philosophies, is to me then the net of it all. What comes out of that sieve is kind of, you know, is acceptable to me, makes good sense to me. It's a Venn diagram, another one, taking the East and the West. Venn, V-E-N-N.
I don't know what that.
It's a mathematician's name. It's basically the Ballantines. And if you look at the one circle being the East and one circle being the West, and they overlap like a Ballantine.
Ballantine.
Like a Ballantine with a B. Where they overlap, that little integral sweet spot, is the integration of those two concepts, not their opposition.
Well, that could be the synergy of systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. The point is it's unpredicted, and it's not at all sure. We may be meant to entropy, that is, as a species. We don't want to accept that because we've gotten to a point where we're so powerful now, but it may be in terms of the broader system of things, and we've got to keep an opening on that. And the people in the Cro-Magnon caves, I bet they sat around and contemplated which God made all this and made up all these things that we have in history because we didn't have the knowledge to be able to understand it materialistically about what in the hell, where are we, what is it about. Well, the CERN thing is going to take the measure of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. Is that? They got it down out to 200,000 years. Within the Big Bang, the wave that set up this universe. String theory says there may be parallel universes. Physics is doing, but they're going to have a measurement of that within a second of its occurrence, 13.8 billion years ago. That's a pretty good measure of brain capacity, being able to take the measure of the universe and is signaling something. But we have also on the other side that we might very well, just by being linked into the outdated institutions, stillborn. We may blow it up and blow up the entire species, and we have that capability.
I want to bring it back to psychedelics.
It's a very interesting time to be alive.
I want to bring it back to psychedelics for exactly the point you
By
just
all
made.
means, and let's get into the brain.
Well, before we do the brain thing, I just want to, the people have talked about, you talked about what made me think of it was, ancient man in a cave thinking about, philosophical issues.
Yeah.
And it made me think again of the idea of, of a caveman, gathering nuts and berries and mushrooms.
And painting those beautiful paintings in France.
And painting beautiful paintings. So that I think, some people have speculated that psychedelic visionary plants form the spur, the impetus for religious
That's interesting.
thinking.
That's very interesting.
And that's possible. And some people have also speculated that, and I'm not, a religious person or a person who believes in fate all that much, although I do believe in integration and wholeness and harmony.
Yeah.
Some people have speculated that the atom bomb and LSD were both created approximately the same time.
48 was LSD, Hoffman.
No, 38. And
was it really 38?
It was first synthesized in 1938.
Oh, it was an ergot.
And then it was used, an ergot derivative. And then in 1943 was when he resynthesized it. He had a premonition that he wanted to resynthesize this substance, lysergic acid diethylamide, number 25.
I always had it 48. When the bomb came, it was right in the same time.
No, it was definitely 38.
Yeah,
and then
right.
He resynthesized it in 43 and had the first intentional psychedelic experience.
And maybe we could talk about what that does. Because one of the things we didn't have, I don't know if we knew in 1940s. This is what I'm saying. This is such a time. Every day, Neal, there comes over another revolution over the transom from every field, everywhere. It's a quickening. Like Ventnor's now got the thing, they've just synthesized a new life form, for crying out loud. They'll throw that bomb out. I mean, things are moving so. Do you understand what I'm saying? What an exciting time. I can understand people being angst-ridden, but bored I can't imagine, because it's just so much going on,
I've never been bored in my whole life. But what happened back in World War II was one thing. But then there's been twists and turns, ups and downs through the 60s and whatnot. In the early 50s, in the 50s and early 60s, there was an enormous amount of peer-reviewed scientific research on the use of psychedelics, hallucinogens they called them back then.
Right.
And then, they got out of the bag, came out into the public sphere, and the public clamped down. It's almost as if society was slipped a Mickey, given psychedelics without their knowledge, dosed, in other words.
Beyond alcohol and whatnot.
And started having a bad time.
Yeah.
And in the 60s, it was as if society was experimenting with psychedelics, and the traditional society, the establishment said, no, I'm having a bummer. This is not a good thing. No, stamp it down.
Go back to your booze.
Right. And it took about 40 years before they started, society essentially, the enthusiasts came back to society and said, come on, society, it's not so terrible.
That's happening now?
Try it again.
Yeah.
And now there's research going on at Harvard, at NYU, at Johns Hopkins,
Timothy Leary would
at
be
UCLA.
happy. Yeah, right.
The first psychedelics research at Harvard since Timothy Leary kind of, messed it up from a scientific perspective.
I don't wonder it was such a time. No, but the thing I was thinking about, you understand the brain and the way the brain works. And I think as recently as, 50, 60 years ago, we didn't know that the brain had neurotransmitters. We didn't know. For all we knew, it was hardwired, the frontal lobe.
And it's all endogenous. There's systems in place. Every single drug that you take, from caffeine to cocaine to heroin, has its own internal analog.
Exactly, and you can have a biochemical model for every state of consciousness that a human being, from suffering pain to ecstatic joy.
Right. And
it will have a certain ratio of transmitters at the axons between the neurons that connect the 10 to the 10th or 11th power neurons in the human brain. We didn't know that.
No, it's sort of like a big pipe organ in a church,
Right.
You've got multiple keyboards, and you have black and white keys, and so there's agonist and antagonist. Antagonists, go against the natural functioning of the endogenous neurotransmitter that the drug or the psychedelic is sort of mimicking or spurring, and the agonist increases that action. So that's like black keys and white keys.
Is that got uptake in mind?
There's uptake. That's a different topic, but
but it's related to the system.
It is indeed. The neurotransmitters die back if you give somebody. That's why you have tolerance, because if you give somebody too much of a substance that the body would naturally go in small doses, and then you give an external substance, an exogenous substance that triggers the system into play in a way that is never meant to be so intensely played.
Well, who
what
says
happens
it was never
is
meant to be?
Neurotransmitters, the receptor sites die off, and so you might have 50 million receptor sites. Well, if you give it a lot and a lot and a lot of this external substance and trigger it so much, then 50% of them may die off, and now you've got only 25%. It's only 25 million receptor sites. So now it's been regulated. It's been down-regulated, so that the receptor sites have been, there's fewer of them, and now it's back to normal. So you have to take more of the drug in order to have the same effect.
Yeah, but it's also, you've got a model for any state of human consciousness. There will be, you could lay it down in some sort of algorithm to where there will be a certain percentage of serotonin is affected. Then you got dopamine. You got all the others. I don't know how many there are.
Those are like the different keyboards.
I think acetylcholine was the first that they ever discovered, and it's all within our lifetime. They're discovering the way the brain is structured.
It's very interesting because the psychedelics are structurally, chemically related to serotonin. And
structurally related?
They look almost
affect
identical.
Serotonin.
No, they look almost identical. When you look at the molecules, you'll see that serotonin and psilocybin or LSD, any of the psychedelics, have the indole ring, the six-sided hexagonal ring, and some of the branches.
Six-sided what? Hexagonal?
It's called the indole, I-N-D-O-L-E, the indole ring, which is a hexagonal sort of array of molecules.
Is that the shape of a neurotransmitter, or no? What are you talking? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
The chemical serotonin. If you look at it structurally,
I see. The chemicals.
It's got a six-sided ring associated with it.
Hexagonal.
Hexagonal ring. And then if you look at the psychedelics, they're also built on that indole ring, and they're slightly different, but they also fit into the receptor sites. Not maybe 100%, like the serotonin would.
Is it also true that any state of consciousness will be characterized by a certain ratio of transmitters at the axons between that connect the 10 to the 10th power, 11th power neurons in the brain into a system, so that happiness, you would have a certain ratio of those, or sadness, you would have another. You would have a biochemical model for any state of consciousness?
Sure.
Is that true?
I think so. There's a substrate.
I don't think we've known that over time. We've tried to associate it with, gods and psychotherapy and things like that.
Okay.
But
so now you have
every
another
state
duality.
of consciousness has a biochemical model that can be known.
But now you have a duality again between the conscious experience of the mind or the soul or whatever you want to call it.
That's different than the brain, if I may.
Hold on. That's the one side. And then the other side is the brain, the neurotransmitters,
that's physical.
The structure-activity relationships.
That's sort of materialistic.
That's materialistic. The structure of the neurotransmitter, and as it fits into the receptor site, the activity it triggers. Structure-activity relationships.
And that's a state of consciousness.
And what you were just describing was like happiness would be a certain ratio of dopamine and serotonin.
If you win you're struggling and you win the lottery, you'll have a certain ratio of transmitters and uptake within the brain that is characteristic of that state of happiness.
Exactly, but it's a two-way street though, because like in psychotherapy, for example, there's pharmaceutical approaches and there's talk therapy. And nowadays the pharmaceutical approaches, with the hegemony of the insurance and pharmaceutical industry, the one industry that they've become, wants you to take pharmaceuticals instead, because they're cheaper,
there's profit in it.
And it's profit over the long haul. And they want to
cheaper than talk therapy.
They want to cheaper, It's like $5, for your pills versus they want to disintermediate the talk therapist out of the system. So instead of having that talk therapist who drives a Mercedes and has an office on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, they want to take that money and they want to put it into the insurance industry. They want to keep it themselves. So they want to disintermediate and get the therapist out of the loop and just have psychopharmacologists or drug management psychiatrists deal with giving people pharmaceuticals. Okay. So but it's a two-way street because if you take a drug, it will change your mix like you described, and therefore change your mood. Absolutely. But if you have talk therapy,
if I may, if you have a certain mood, like you won the lottery, you've got a state of mind called elated. You see them on television, and you're elated, or orgasm, or something.
You could measure the neurotransmitter mix.
You could have a biochemical model of what is causing that state of mind and a biochemical model for that state of consciousness. No. Okay, good.
Yes,
straighten me out.
I like the idea of what you described because it is accurate, but it's not a biological model of what causes the effect. In other words,
what's causing the effect, if I may, you can do it by life's experience. You win the lottery. Or you meet a lovely lady. Therapy. Or you could do it with talk
and
any life, and that will change. But you'll have a biochemical, so and you can alter that biochemical model by taking a drug.
You can do it either
That's
way.
Another way of doing it.
So now we have this beautiful duality.
Right.
It's clean, it's logical. You have the substrate of neurotransmitters operating in the brain, and you have this amorphous thing that is relationship or feeling or soul or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That's that's non-specifiable except by that model you just described.
Right. Okay.
So what do? We're an industrial society.
Right.
We're Western. We go to that model, and we use pharmaceuticals for psychotherapy, for example.
Well, we haven't had them over a longer
But we've got them now.
We had herbs and things in the past.
Well,
yeah.
So what I was saying is you have those two different models. And again, what I think is happening is that's, again, a reflection of the Cartesian duality between what is God and what is man. And how you can relegate God to Sunday morning in church, and the rest of the week you can screw your neighbor, both literally and metaphorically.
Well, there's a lot of that
So
going
I think
on.
we're coming back together and reintegrating that split from where we came, the Cartesian
With the
split.
Enlightenment, are you talking Cartesian, or are you talking about 200,000 years ago?
I'm talking more about 200,000 years ago and up to Descartes. And then when Descartes came along, and because of the press of the economy, of the new industrial society, which required some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card, like you could, for example, charge interest. The Catholic Church wouldn't let you charge interest.
They got around that. We got around that in the West. There's
along.
still Islamic systems of Sharia appliance where it does use interest.
But at the time,
and that's maybe the more threatening thing to our model,
to
our economic model that is an empire on the world, than all of the guys with an AK-47 is the intellectual challenge they may pose for 1.5 billion
in a way,
people.
Because the idea of having this split between what's called spirituality and what's called business, and how you can then, like I say, go to church on Sundays and feel you're going to go to heaven, even though you're screwing your neighbor during the rest of the week, is a reflection of that split. And so this idea behind about the substrate of neurotransmitters versus talk therapy or elation or joy is a reflection of that same split. And I think what's happening is we're coming back together into a view where, is it this or is it that? The answer is yes.
Both.
Both meaning one.
Okay, I wonder if I could go on to a language that we're talking about this thing seen materialistically, about the extension, and that we now have weapon systems, and you seem to agree, a lot of people do, the modeling does, that the weapon systems have finally reached a final extension where they have become, particularly with germ things and some wave weapons that are coming out of black ops and so forth, that they are literally, if they were unleashed like the guns of August 1917 in a spasm of hatred, it would mean the very end of every single human being on the planet. Do you think that it couldn't happen in the Second World War? We were trying. Did you think that that modeling, can only be modeled, is perhaps correct? Or is it something that is ipso facto absurd? No, there'll be survivors and everything will go on. Has there been a qualitative change at that level in terms of the killing capability of our species?
I don't know. I'm not a weaponry expert.
I'm asking you what you think.
But my gut would tell me that it's certainly possible that if you had the right germ, that everybody could get it and everybody could die. It's also possible. It's also possible that with genetic variation being what it is, that there would be survivors. So that's a fine point, though. Whether there's 100,000 people or 1 million people left or no people left, it makes a big difference.
It does make a big difference at a certain existential level. At an existential level,
it's a very big difference between no humans and some humans.
But the question I would put is, if it is, and there are modelings, and I think there are people who can do that, Jonathan Schell and that kind of thing. They've read that book, the Earth, and it is true, even though we've just got, so, and we're still locked into the same old outdated, but then what would be an equally, we're just on the material plane, none of the gods, none of the spirits, none of that stuff, okay? But you're just on the level of material evolution and everything like that. What would be equally significant in the material world, equally significant on the living side that differentiates in an existential new way the human condition, equally significant to the destructive scenario? What might it be? I am under the attention that it happened, species lethality came around 1970 at the level of capability, and that we were transcending material scarcity with sense of design around the year 1970, as Buckminster Fuller projected, that there were more haves and have-nots in the human society for the first time in 200,000 years, and with the ecology, and that 1970 was a point where that was being felt artistically and so forth, and that so that that what's changed is we have transcended material scarcity, which was characteristic of the entire human society and all the institutions, notions of human nature, and we've transcended that. And it would be nice if that's the case, if once in a great while it would be mentioned rather than just considered ipso facto absurd.
I don't see that we've transcended.
No, I'm not at the level of capability.
Capability, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and the reality is totally unjust.
Okay.
There's nothing. People are letting their babies starve when you can make all kinds. You got a capability of feeding everybody. We have systems predicated and built, institutions, nation states, and so forth.
What's going to be the concrete, material, evolutionary perspective that would counteract that?
No, and I don't want to deal with the reality.
Species.
Don't want to deal with the reality.
No, I wasn't dealing with reality.
Want to deal with capability. Do you think it's possible that at the level of capability, not inflection points of theories of physics and so forth, but the reality of systems that exist, that we have transcended at the level of capability, nothing to do with the reality. It's all reifying outdated institutions when scarcity was real for 200,000 years, and you had to benefit, you had to steal from somebody else and all of that. But that we've done that. Do you think that is a possibility? And if it is, why is it not on letters 25 feet high going around Times Square all the time? There is enough.
I think.
Why is that never mentioned by anybody in any position of political authority or responsibility for the operation of spaceship Earth?
Okay, I agree with you that we've reached the capability of feeding everybody on the planet.
Not feeding, transcending scarcity, and that includes knowledge, that includes everything.
Okay,
it's a quality.
More broadly then.
It's like punctuated equilibrium in evolution, that we're coming to the end of a species, of a situation that is a paradigm. Everything is out of date. Everything is needed new, and we don't have the vision from our political or even our intellectual leadership.
Why don't we have that?
Well, I'm asking you. You're part of the intellectual leadership.
Because we're still, on the sort of the back push of history, the momentum, the inertia of history, which is fear, which is scarcity, which is give me mine. That's what America is all about.
Well, that's what the evolution. That's what evolution. That's the evolutionary process of human society.
What's going to transcend
that?
Well,
I think at least you can mention it.
So what's going to transcend?
But we've come to an end of that. That's what Woodstock was about.
We've come to an end of it in capability. You're right.
Yes,
but not in implementation.
But before then, you didn't have the capability. That's the point. Do you understand the difference?
Yes.
Don't try to make it be that it's real, because you've got all the injustices. The system is totally unjust. It doesn't allow for the full realization of everybody.
Are you going to just stop there?
No.
Or are you going to move toward making that capability implemented? How are we going to do that?
No, make it aware.
Well, awareness is part of it.
That it is relevant to decision making and institution structures and the way you're going to finance. We have to restructure the entire finance system. We have to restructure the entire educational system.
So
everything has to be done. Awareness of there's a qualitative transformation at the level of. Why is that never mentioned ever?
Well, because the same backwash that pushes us forward into the competitive industrial sort of approach that we take in the West is also the ones who control the information.
Is it worth considering by intellectuals? Intellectuals don't have to be combined. They don't have to be constrained by, and what that would be in the most is money. How am I going to make money? How am I going to make more money? How am I going to make money? It's all economics.
You're a professor. Where are you going to get your grants from?
Well, all right, exactly. Okay. Then at least that brings it out into the open. That brings it out in the open why it is. People are bought off.
It's valuable. Information is valuable.
Okay, but
it changes human behavior. It creates profit, purchase power. Information is very, very powerful. Perhaps the most powerful thing there is.
And maybe
if
it's
you control
appropriate.
Information, then you control your own, your own pension. You can send your child to college if you're the vice president of a media corporation.
Right. All right.
So you control the information for your own self-interest.
Okay.
So what's going to change it is the global village concept.
Okay. Well,
that the internet is finally making McLuhan's vision real.
Well, not the internet. It's the whole evolutionary process, because it's not just communication. These things occurred before there was any internet. Internet is like frosting on the cake. I did a thing with Leary, and I asked him, did he think that there's a change in consciousness? Yes, and he said the technology and the information is just the frosting on the cake. It's the whole process.
Right, but
it's the whole evolutionary process.
But McLuhan's theories couldn't really get traction.
That was Leary I was talking to.
Oh,
I was
yeah,
talking to
I was
Leary.
talking about
Timothy Leary said that. The technology and the internet and the extension, all that, he was into that.
Yeah.
Or the psychedelics were just no, he said the psychedelics were the frosting on the cake because that altered consciousness, that people could understand these things, but that the technology was what was really making the change, and the psychedelic
that's
thing.
what I was saying too in bringing in McLuhan. McLuhan had this vision of the global village, but it couldn't be implemented until there was a global infrastructure. And now there's a global infrastructure, so McLuhan's vision of this integrated whole of society, you know, the planetary global vision, the Gaian vision, played out in modernity, post-modernity, you know, is now possible. So I'm an optimist, really, not maybe in the short term, but in the long term. And so I believe that ultimately we'll be able to, you know, transcend the kind of I think you're right that we're heading into a major shift, and I think right now we've got sort of inertia from the old ways that are clashing with the emerging new ways, and that, you know, what's going to happen, I think, is we're going to get the idea. We're going to have a colleague in Lithuania. We're not going to bomb. We're going to, you know, basically get the idea of the global the global village, and that's, I think, what's going to reduce the threat of species eliminating technologies, for example. We're going to do it through maturity, not through control or through the evolution of structures or mechanistic systems. We're going to do it through love, through holism, through gestalt, through integration. That's, I think, what's going to, you know, if we survive, that's what's going to make us survive. Not new technologies to control old technologies, but a different attitude toward ourselves and everybody else on the planet.
Well, I don't know. It looks like we're running out of time, apparently, because we're supposed to have more time, but they're signaling me that we're going to have to stop with this because there's another crew coming in. Is that true, Gru? We have to stop?
Live show at 6.
They have a live show at 6. Okay, so we're going to have to cut it off. Sorry. We just got talking. We could have said some more. We should have gotten started earlier. They got a live show, so we're going to have to cut this off, and we'll have to put something to this. But okay,
let's do part 2 someday.
Someday we'll do that, definitely. It's been your pleasure to have the perceptions then of Neal Goldsmith, and it's your pleasure to have had his perception, just running the graphics now.
Great.
And thanks for doing that. Thanks for coming in, Neal. Really appreciate it. And great, we just got wound up, and then
my book is coming out.
Oh, talk about it real quick.
Psychedelic Healing, subtitled "The Promise of Entheogens" or psychedelics for for psychotherapy and spiritual development.
That's another name for psychedelics, theogens.
Entheogens. Entheogen, generating the theological or the spiritual sense inside you.
Very good. Okay, thanks for viewing that. We'll try to put something on the tail end of this, and then thanks a lot for coming in. All the best. Happy holidays.
Thanks for having me, too.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so this place is pretty good, and this is outside the market in a certain sense. Hardly anything is, but you can do programs here that make everything available for free to any citizen.
Right.
You could do it, or people that is CUNY. And the only deal is you're not supposed to make any money. You can't make money. They try and monitor against that, which is a little bit odd in this society. But welcome to Manhattan Network.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Welcome very much to Conversations, where it's a pleasure to welcome to the program John P. Morgan, M.D., and he's a pharmacologist. He was a guest of Conversations way back in 1986, back in the dark ages, and we were talking about urine testing, which was all the rage then at that time. But he's been following these issues, and we're going to talk about the state of the society so far as drugs and these kind of things. And John, welcome very much to Conversations and to Manhattan Network.
Thank you again.
Good to see you again, indeed. I wonder, maybe you could, we did last time, maybe you could share a little bit of your own background. You're a pharmacologist. Maybe you could talk about that. We want to talk about pharmacology and chemicals and that sort of thing, but could you share a little of your background, please?
I went to medical school and trained as a physician. In fact, I'm an internist. But after I completed my training in internal medicine and a time in the United States military, I became very interested in drugs and in drug therapy.
Interesting.
And I took a postdoctoral fellowship which was focused upon the proper evaluation of therapeutic agents, both in terms of their good and their bad, that is, therapeutic effects and toxic effects. And I had worked at the Johns Hopkins in Rochester for a few years, looking at a variety of drug systems. The first drug I was ever interested in was levodopa, the treatment for Parkinson's disease.
Yes, indeed.
And then in the early 1970s, like so many others, I became attracted by the fact that there was federal money available related to the broad field of drug abuse. And there was a program which funded full-time medical scientists to increase medical student awareness of drug and alcohol problems.
Drug and alcohol.
Yes, problems, both in terms of, again, in terms of addiction, but also in terms of proper prescribing and how to use dangerous drugs. And so I started working in that field, brought those teaching values to the pharmacology courses I was involved with, and sort of turned my interest to the pharmacology of psychoactive drugs, that is, the drugs that enter the brain and change behavior and mood and level of consciousness, both the legal and the illegal ones.
I see. That's really interesting. I wonder if we could get a few terms here, if we could, just to get grounded. We have a term pharmacology that has to do with what we call drugs. Now, we have, and the Hindus have been telling us for a long time, that there are no academic disciplines in reality. It is a seamless web. But we do have these disciplines. We have chemistry or chemicals as a terminology. We have drugs as a terminology. And could you straighten us out a little bit? What's the relationship between pharmacology and chemistry or chemicals? And if we use the term chemicals relating to human, the mind process or the functioning of that. Could you straighten us out a little bit?
I can certainly try. One of the things that I tell people is for a medical student to take pharmacology, he must have previously passed courses in chemistry, that is the character of chemicals, and physiology, the processes of the human body. So pharmacology is most involved in the interaction between living tissues, humans and other organisms, and chemicals. Now, the pharmacologist is most concerned with those chemicals. There's relatively few chemicals that exert therapeutic or symptomatic effects in humans. But pharmacologists are also interested in toxicology, those chemicals which at the doses humans use might cause mischief, might cause toxicology. It is very important to always quote Paracelsus, who in the 13th century said, it's the dose that makes the poison. So there is no chemical, probably, that in high enough doses cannot harm humans, and the converse is true. There is no chemical, however dangerous, that humans can't take safely at some dose. Now, what pharmacologists...
That's a calibration thing.
Yeah, well, it's a quantitative thing.
And at a certain level, if I may, again, basic is that everything is chemical.
In a certain sense,
all molecules, everything is chemical, so that's a very basic thing. But
that's true. One of the things that that distinguishes pharmacology is that it's been mostly concerned with individual chemicals. Let's say that therapy begins with someone discovering that this plant or this herb has a property in humans that is generally desirable. Now, pharmacology began in the last century by scientists trying to find the active constituents of those plants, isolating them, perhaps synthesizing them, and putting them in preparation so that they could be given at adequate doses to humans, and so the preparations could be pure and standardized. So we knew that people could take enough foxglove and it would treat their heart failure, or humans could take enough of a poppy and not only be only it have a soporific effect, but have a pain-relieving effect. So then pharmacologists tried to isolate what was in those plants.
What's causing that at a chemical level.
At a chemical level and at a monochemical level.
At a monochemical,
So we learned that the most important constituent of the poppy plant was morphine, and then we have exploited morphine to a fare thee well. We learned that the chemical in the foxglove plant was digitalis, and we now have pure, often synthetic preparations. So we have a sort of ongoing battle in which there are many people who like the idea of nature making the chemical preparation.
The herbologists.
Exactly, taking herbal preparations. And sometimes, of course, the herbalists are right in that the preparation is useful, but it is almost always mixed in with a variety of other chemicals which do little and may detract from the effects of the therapeutic effects. There are herbologists who would be very offended at what I just said.
Because
they think that it's best to take this mixture of chemicals. In fact, one of the things things we will talk about more is the product that we call marijuana.
Yeah.
Marijuana contains 60 different chemicals of the sort called cannabinoids, but in truth, there's only one of those that's critically important, it seems. There may be some others that have side effects, but delta-9 THC, which Dr. Meshulam found in the plant, isolated, learned a way to synthesize, prepared it, and put it into monocannabinoidal preparations for its therapeutic evaluation. Now, the humans continue to use marijuana, particularly to smoke it, because that's the safest and fastest way to deliver this effective monochemical. Many herbal preparations deliver such low doses that they exert neither much harm nor much benefit. Again, there's some herbologists who would disagree with me. But so marijuana works because the same way that ephedra species work, the same way that digitalis works, the same way that opium works, because it delivers a single chemical in a high enough concentration to exert an effect on humans. Now, that effect is mediated by the chemical entering the body, being distributed throughout the body, and finding cells which will accept it.